Hello, BookTube. I recently watched a video on the channel It Came From the Page, a great channel. I will leave a link to it down below. In that video, our inimitable host was talking about a handful of movies that are actually better than the books they were adapted from. And I sat up straight because that is a long-standing subject, not only on this channel, but in my reading life for a long time before there was an internet. That is my long-standing contention that most book-to-movie adaptations are better than their original books. And there have been a lot of reasons for that. I've got a lot of argument about it. People have said, how can you be a fan of reading and say that? And my answer is pretty simple. With the book, I have to spend time with the author. And the author has to fill the pages. And the author is almost always being paid by the fact that they can fill the pages. It's not always going to lead to wrung-out drippings of pure genius, and it usually doesn't. In other words, to broaden Ted Sturgeon's rule, 90% of all books are crud. And 90% of each book is crud, usually. There will be exceptions, of course. There are exceptions that prove the rule. There are exceptions that are brilliant from beginning to end. But my point has always been that they kind of are exceptions. And that what a director and a screenwriter has to do is take the book, which can have lots of vapping around just for a page count, or little idiosyncratic fixations by the author. What the screenwriter and the director has to do is take that book and wring all that crap out of it in order to get at an essential story. If the screen adaptation captures the exciting or the interesting or the provocative or the really thought-provoking elements of that story without violating them too much, then I consider it a successful adaptation. And a successful adaptation of a book, therefore, will almost always be better than the original book. You might disagree, but when I was watching the video on It Came From the Page, examples were springing to mind for me, just springing to mind. And as he put it, it's my channel. I can make these contentions if I want. You're free to disagree, although you'll be wrong. So I thought I would elaborate. He did 5 videos. I'm going to do 10. I thought I would do a version of my own, a response, if you will, to movies that are better than their books. And my own version of this particular subject will come with 100% less cat anus, just in case that's of interest to you. So we're going to start off. This list is going to bother not only book dudes, but especially film bros. The film bros are going to go nuts, I think, for some of these choices. But I thought I might as well get that out of the way, because I'm going to... my first choice is going to go straight at the sinuses of both those groups, both the dude bro readers and the film bros, because my first choice in the matter of a movie that is better than its original book is Planet of the Apes. Here referring to Pierre Boulle's ridiculous 1963 book that is just as atrocious in the original as it is in translation. And I'm sorry about that. I know that some of you have a warm soft spot for it. But it was adapted into a movie. With Charlton Heston. I'm sure you think that's the movie I'm talking about that is better than the book. But no, the movie with Charlton Heston is every bit as bad as the ridiculous, dorky, awkward elbow, completely sententious book that it comes from. No, just to get at the film bros the way I'm getting at the dude bros, I am talking about the Mark Wahlberg movie. This was directed by Tim Burton in 2001, and it is wonderful. It's a hell of a lot better than the novel, but it's also a lot better than the Charlton Heston movie. Not least because, I mean, there are many reasons. There's some actual acting involved here, and if you're really a purist and you really just can't let go, well, Charlton Heston is in here as well. But also because it much more effectively conveys the alien world. In Planet of the Apes, at least the stupid movie version with Charlton Heston, the apes are hairy people. And in Tim Burton's movie, in addition to them having a culture and, you know, whatnot of their own, it also reminds us that any of the great apes are infinitely stronger than humans. More powerful, more agile than humans. Even the weak ones will tend to be stronger than humans. Humans don't tend to get that. Most humans, if they had to estimate how strong an adult chimpanzee is, for instance, would think an adult chimpanzee is as strong as a really, really strong human. Not even close. Not even close. Their muscles and bones are different. as ours would be if we hadn't made all sorts of evolutionary decisions a long, long time ago. Millions of years ago, we started making evolutionary decisions to drop all that stuff off the back of the sled and concentrate on gigantic Cray computer brains and the ability to communicate complex material at length and at speed. We got rid of our gripping hands. You can still brachiate as a human, but only barely. And we got rid of our fangs, and we got rid of the 100 pounds of muscle. I'm not saying that's the only thing. There's some really good stuff in this movie. But in terms of a movie that adapts a dumb book about an alternate world in which apes rule and humans are slaves, yeah, I'm going to take this. So there you go. We'll start off with The Howls of Protest. We'll move on to 1963, to Peter Brook's directed his movie version of William Golding's 1954 book, Lord of the Flies. Here, once again, I'm not talking about, there was a later reprint, and I'm not talking about that. Instead, I'm talking about the original movie, and this is, of course, the story of a group of boys who get stranded on an island and rapidly descend into barbarism and cannibalism. It set the tone for a million dystopians that followed, and Peter Brook takes the leaden sermonizing of the book and largely gets rid of it. He largely gets rid of it in favor of letting you draw the conclusions, letting you, the viewer, draw the conclusions. In other words, Peter Brook trusts the audience, which William Golding never did. Not in an entire career of writing, he never did that. A lot of writers, not to slight him too much, but a lot of writers never learn that trick. They just don't. They don't have the confidence or enough alcohol in the house or whatever. A lot of writers don't learn the trick of trusting their audience, so they overfeed. And there's no easier example of that than the description in the novel of the death of one of those boys. Those of you who know the story will know exactly the boy I mean. The description of the death of that boy in the novel as compared to the death of that boy in the movie, in the Peter Brook movie, is a perfect illustration of what I'm talking about. So The Lord of the Flies is infinitely better than the book that it comes from. Then we'll move on to a big example. This is an example I bring up all the time. This is William Wyler's direction of BenHur. BenHur has been adapted to the screen for well over a century. It has had many, many adaptations. Way too many people think that this is the only time it was ever adapted, until it was adapted, I think, in the 2000s, with maybe Jack Huston as the hunky lead. You don't step into the sandals of a hunky lead if the previous guy that did it was Charlton Heston in the fullness of his power. You just don't do that. Or you can, but you're going to look like a boy. You're going to look like a reedy little altar boy, and that's what the lead in the new BenHur does. But no, I've been in discussion groups and in discussions on Facebook and on Twitter where film bros would say, enough with the remakes. If we just drop Hollywood's weakness for remakes, then we'd have great movies like BenHur. And I had to jump into the comments and say BenHur was a remake. But this was adapted from Lew Wallace's 1880 book, which sold like crazy. Lew Wallace had been a Civil War soldier and tried his hand at a whole bunch of things, but he eventually wrote a book. He wrote a book called BenHur, which is the story of well, you will probably know the story. It's probably a story of a prosperous Roman Jew who falls into slavery and the piratism as a slave, as a galley slave, and famously as a chariot racer. And Lew Wallace's book did really well. And a large reason that it did really well, which is kind of overlooked today, is visible in its subtitle. It was called A Tale of the Christ. That's exactly what it was. Try thinking of that when you watch William Wyler's adaptation. This adaptation is from 1959, and although in 1959 America was basically a functioning theocracy, the movie is very much not A Tale of the Christ. Very much not. That element is a fringe at best. This is a spectacle, a big Hollywood spectacle, and hats off to William Wyler for realizing that there was a spectacle trapped inside this talky, preachy book. So hats off to him for realizing that he didn't need to make one of his own, that he could do this instead. It does it wonderfully, just wonderfully. Oh my God. I'm not talking just about the spectacle here, although you can pick your favorite scene right? Your favorite spectacle scene from Ben-Hur. Most people, the first thing that comes to mind would be the famous chariot race. But there are other scenes of pure spectacle, like ramming speed, where you've got this action at sea, or my own favorite moment, which involves horses. Just a man saying goodnight to his prized horses. It's just a glorious scene. It's very intimate. It just takes place in the confines of one tent, but you won't see a scene like it in Hollywood today that isn't CGI. But hats off to William Wyler for seeing that, and that makes this. I mean, you get those spectacle moments, but you also get quieter moments, and not just the infamous oyster scene. You get quieter moments that are quite moving, quite interpersonal. So I don't think that much was lost from this thing except the preaching. So I'm happy to nominate it. Then this next one, this next one might get to the Dude Bros as well. We travel to 1971. This is Anthony Burgess's novel, A Clockwork Orange. And Burgess's novel is mostly just a very hurried and obviously very hungover exercise in fugitive linguistics. This author was fatally fascinated by linguistics, just to a way that you really wish you could just roll up a newspaper, slap him across the nose, and say, "Knock it off." But no, he did it in his reviews, does it in a lot of his work, did a lot of his consulting work in Hollywood, and it made him lots of money. The Clockwork Orange made him tons and tons of money, but the book is mostly an exercise in fugitive linguistics, whereas Stanley Kubrick's movie, the two are sort of joined at the hip. This is kind of a little bit of a cheat in terms of a movie that was made from a book. They're sort of, in terms of origin gestation, they're sort of joined at the hip. But nevertheless, it counts. It counts. I think, for instance, today in 2023, I think far more people read the book than see the movie. I don't see, other than cinematisse, I don't think many people haul out Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange and watch it. Probably justifiably so, because Kubrick is, in my opinion, again, I don't mean to incense the Dude Bros, but he's largely a bad director. In A Clockwork Orange, he's a very good director. Maybe because he had the author on set every minute of every day. I don't know if maybe that helped or maybe not. But A Clockwork Orange captures the violence, the unpredictability, again, the dystopian aspect of this 10 times better than the sloppy book. So that makes my list. Then we're going to move to 1990. This is an author who appeared on the video from It Came From the Page quite often in adulatory terms. This is one of the worst authors who's ever set pen to paper. Of course, I'm referring to Stephen King, who has almost never written anything good in 60 years of writing. That is an achievement on its own. An anti-achievement, if you will. It's unbelievable to me that in all this time, readers who were born when his first book came out have already died, and he's still writing. And in all that time, he has never learned the first thing about how to tell a good story. In fact, he's lost knowledge. He used to at least be able to imitate some aspects of good storytelling back when he was edited. Now, he's actually lost knowledge. And he's been adapted to the big screen innumerable times. And I would argue that in almost all of those cases, the adaptations are by definition better than the book, because the book is soggy cold cereal. The book is absolutely awful. I could go down the list of things that match that description. An example that I always come up with, for instance, would be It, the Tim Curry version of It, or Needful Things with Max von Sydow, who's going to come up on this list. But in this case, I'm choosing Misery. With James Caan and the great Kathy Bates here. This was directed by Rob Reiner, and the book came out in 1987. Rob Reiner wasted very little time in adapting this. The adaptation came out in 1990. And the book is full of, well, since this is Stephen King, you don't need me to tell you, the book is full of self-pity about being an author. Inserted by the author, who's, I have this deadline, I've got a pool payment to make, I've got a mortgage to keep up, they're making me write, the fans, they never leave me alone, they're making me write. And once you see that element in Misery, you realize how often you see it in Stephen King novels. The writer never appears without being the victim. Even the character in The Shining is a victim. The writer in that book is the primary victim. True, he turns out to victimize other people, but it's not him. It's not forces that he encourages that have caused him to become a monster. It's the outside world. There's no more consistent tone in Stephen King's crap novels than that, shouldn't you pity me for being a multi-billionaire author? There's no more consistent tone than that. I don't. The only thing I pity Stephen King for as an author is that he's so unconsciously bad. He is literally the emperor with no clothes on, and he's constantly going to fashion shows. But he's got Lifetime Literary Achievement Awards from allegedly major institutions, so he's never going to stop. He's never going to learn. That element runs through this movie as well. Once you see it for what it is, once you strip away the different power differentials, you see that Misery the book and Misery the movie are all about how much you're all picking on the writer. Can't you just leave the writer alone? You chose this career, okay, pal? But in the book, there's precious little else that you have to go on, and in the movie, you get Kathy Bates, who is absolutely terrific. She's absolutely terrific. You can tell. I firmly believe if you boot up that old 1990 movie and watch it, I firmly believe that you can tell that Kathy Bates is just deciding, well, all right, I've read the script. I'm just going to act the hell out of this thing. I'm not going to pay attention to what's going on in the rest of the movie. I'm not going to pay attention to where this thing comes from. I'm just going to act the hell out of this. And she does. And that alone, even if you're leaving out James Caan, I know that once again, I am hitting the intersection in the Venn diagrams of the film bros and the dude bros, but I've never really liked James Caan. Not really. He's passable in The Way of the Gun, but that's when he's 150 years old. Other than that, he seems. I know all of you are talking about. You're all thinking about The Godfather now, but he seems to exist as an audience stand-in for the dude bros and the stillborn dude bros in the audience. And of course, I'm not a dude bro or a stillborn dude bro, so I was always looking at this big chunk of dumb masculinity and thinking, all right, but what are you doing here? Couldn't we get somebody else instead of you? But anyway. In other words, I firmly believe that James Caan had an acting career solely because Robert Redford couldn't do it all. It was Redford to bring a kind of an epicene sharpness to what he was doing. I firmly believe that James Caan got acting jobs because he was not as attractive as Robert Redford. And some directors would say, we need a chunk of masculinity here, but it can't be beauty. But anyway, that's a rant for another time. Apparently not, but still, that's a rant for another time. Then we're going to move on to a fairly easy choice. I don't think the film bros will argue with me here, or the dude bros. We're talking about 1993 here. We're talking about Steven Spielberg's adaptation of Michael Crichton's 1990 novel, Jurassic Park, which goes on and on and on. Michael Crichton couldn't write his way out of a wet paper bag. And I know that at the time, 100 years earlier, plenty of people said that about his obvious forebearer, H.G. Wells. That doesn't make it any less true. So getting to the end of Jurassic Park, you have to give him a lot of slack. There are parts that are entertaining, but you have to be in for the long haul because you're not going to get anything in the way of adroit prose, expert pacing, anything like characters. And Spielberg is a very predictable primary colors director, but you will definitely get more out of Jurassic Park the movie than you will out of the book. I know there are differences. I know there are differences in all of these things. I am not nitpicking the differences in the adaptations. And I'm also not talking for the purposes of this video about what makes an accurate adaptation or not. I mean, come on. Planet of the Apes, Jurassic Park, we're not talking about Pushkin here. The accurate adaptation of Jurassic Park is dinosaurs today. 2 words. That's it. If you do that, you've captured the essence of the book. And this does. This completely does. Jurassic Park is every bit as enjoyable now as it was when it was made 30 years ago. So it definitely counts. Then we'll go to a mini-series, which might not be fair game, but then again, a lot of the authors that I'm talking about here have inspired miniseries. And here I want to talk about a great miniseries that apparently is not all that available anymore. You really owe it to yourself to hunt it down and find it, because it is terrific, absolutely terrific. I have subjected one particular house guest here at Hyde Cottage to as much of it as could be found, and that is the miniseries Masada, which was directed by Boris Sagal in 1981. And it was adapted from a novel called The Antagonist, which came out a decade earlier by Ernest K. Gann, the author of Fate is the Hunter. He wrote a nonfiction work about aviation called Fate is the Hunter that is actually really, really good. Fate is the Hunter is really, really good. for a time, I don't know if it's still true, but for a long, long time, for probably 30 or 40 years after Fate is the Hunter came out, there wasn't a hangar or a small airfield anywhere in the country that didn't have a copy of that book sitting on the shelf. And if I'm right about that, if I'm right that was really popular, and certainly it deserved to be, it reads like nothing else that Ernest K. Gahn wrote, then that might support my longstanding theory that a lot of authors would have been better off writing nonfiction. That wasn't where the money was. And Ernest K. Gahn in 1971 wrote a novel called The Antagonist. Very boring title for a very fascinating story that he manages to make boring. So this is a story of the Roman siege of the fortress, of the Jewish fortress of Masada, which you can read about in Josephus, where the Roman commander, Cornelius Flavius Silva, leads the Roman army to besiege the top of this fortress, which had been built in the days of Herod the Great, specifically in order to withstand a besieging army. It had huge amounts of water reservoirs, had huge amounts of food reservoirs. It was accessible only from a tiny serpentine path, so that, one person, literally one person with some rocks, could hold off an advance column of an army. You could only go up the path one at a time. And a holdout band of Jews after the destruction of the Great Temple in Jerusalem held out in Masada, and Segal and the people who were involved in the script writing decided to make a miniseries out of it, with Peter Strauss as Elazar ben Yair, the leader of the Jews on the top of Masada, and Peter O'Toole, I think in his first television miniseries, as Silva. And they loaded the cast with all sorts of other great people, and it's incredible. Masada, the miniseries, is simply incredible. Simply incredible. It's infinitely quotable. I've quoted it at length on this channel, but also infinitely moving and real and adult. It's everything that Ernest K. Gahn's novel is not. So I think that gives it a perfect pride of place on this list. This is a much better version of the thing. Then we'll move to classics territory. This is no offense intended to Micah Cummins or to Janet Remembered Reads or no, it's not Janet Remembered Reads. It was, I forget who the co-host was on Classics and Company. Ann Novella and Micah Cummins have an ongoing booktube event in which they read a classic work and then have a guest star on to talk about it. And one of the ones that they just did was Dangerous Liaisons. And this is on my mind because the book is just so awful. It's just so awful. Pierre Laclos wrote this in 1782, and Stephen Frears decided to adapt it in 1980. So 200 years later. It has Glenn Close, has John Malkovich, it has a very young Keanu Reeves, and the movie version captures the essence of the book without any of the dreary, drippy laundromat mess that Laclos drags in, just drags it in. The movie is exquisite in its emotional turns. And when you're reading the book, you can tell that Laclos wanted it to be exquisite in its emotional turns. But it isn't. Only a couple of times. It's only a couple of times that way. All the rest of the time, it's just him beating on the drum over and over and over again. Whereas that is not true in the movie. Stephen Frears is not high on my list of favorite directors, but this is a home run. Absolute home run. And again, we're not talking Pushkin here. It is fairly easy to capture the essence of this book. Boudoir betrayal. Boom. You've captured the essence of this book. So I'm going to put it on this list. Now, this next one, again, we are dealing with the intersection of the Venn diagrams of film bros and dude bros. Probably no movie does that more than this one. And I'm not talking here about the psychological elements, although we could. We're going to move to the year 2000. And we're going to move to, this is directed by a woman. This is directed by Mary Harron, and this is her direction, her version of American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. His book came out in 1991, and it was a cause for scandal because it's so grotesque and also so poor. Very, very poor. This is a very, very poorly written novel. This is an author who can write good prose. He often doesn't, and you just have to, when he writes a book that is effective, I would argue that American Psycho is effective. I would argue that Glamorama is effective. But when he writes a book that's effective and decides not to do any actual writing, any actual prose construction, where he's doing basically what you could do if you had the time, you have to sift through it for other things in order to get at what's making it effective. That's definitely true in American Psycho, which is the story of a toxic finance bro, and has achieved in 2023 a talismanic status that has nothing to do with either this movie, although this movie is absolutely memorized by the worst people in the world. It has nothing to do with the movie, and it has nothing to do with the book, which the people who idolized this character, Patrick Bateman, have never read the book. Never read anything. Never read Fight Club, which could easily have been on this list. And when it comes to that subculture in 2023, if you are a young man or a young woman and you are on a date with someone and you go to his apartment and you see that he has a Blu-ray, a special collector's edition Blu-ray of American Psycho, wait until he's in the bathroom and leave. Wait until he's in the bathroom and then leave. Don't say I am leaving, or he will kill you. Just wait until he's not in the room and then make your exit and never go back. Because that is as red a flag as red flags get. But the 2000 movie doesn't have the dumb stuff to fall back on that Bret Easton Ellis was filling his book with. He was filling his book with, I think, at times deliberately bad writing, also with weird sadomasochistic stretches that you couldn't do it in a movie, specifically because, not because you couldn't film it, couldn't find an actor who would be willing to debase themselves, but because you wouldn't get the rating and therefore you wouldn't get the box office. Which is another thing about movies that usually saves the material they're adapting, is that they've got an audience to please. They've got censors at the studio to please. So they can't have, well, there's a scene in this book involving a rat. You can't really do that. Not really in the movie. But the thing I'm talking about in the book is it's endless vamping with outdated status symbol names and brands and whatnot. You would be wasting your time to do that in the movie. And the director very, very candidly realizes not to do that. Instead, to concentrate on the fact, on the elevator pitch, the essence, the gimmick of American Psycho, which is that they're right among us. That are, to a certain extent, our society creates them, but even if our society doesn't create them, they're right among us. You're going to see them, and you're not necessarily going to know. It's not going to be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That's the whole point of this book. Maybe not the book, but of the movie. Maybe it should have been the point of the book, is that the American Psycho is not going to announce himself. He's going to look like a status symbol of success. That does really well in the movie. That is really well done. Even though I don't, the star is Christian Bale, and I don't like Christian Bale. I've never understood why he gets work. Never. He does nothing at all except glower. But in American Psycho, the director wisely realizes that that's all that Patrick Bateman is there for. That's what you want an actor to do. If your actor couldn't glower, you wouldn't cast him. Then we'll move on here to 1966. This is a children's classic, and I know that seems like it should be off limits because surely children's classic books are things that we should all love and kiss and hug. But I'm not that wild about this particular author, and I am talking about How the Grinch Stole Christmas, which was a 1957 book by a thrice divorced Nazi sympathizer by a beloved children's author. This was a 1957 book, but in 1966 it was adapted into a cartoon. I am not talking here about Jim Carrey's blasphemous movie at all. I would like to think, even in the blue check mark, this won't age well, yikes, read the room, 23rd century or 21st century that we're in, I would like to think that people watching the Jim Carrey Grinch movie, which I don't advise you to do, would share the outrage that I had when I was watching it in the theater, thinking exactly what I thought about Jim Carrey's The Riddler in Batman. I was thinking, okay, so when it comes time for you to play an arch villain, you play a vampy gay person. So what does that say? And you as the director, why are you letting me see this? Why are you signing on to this? So if the Riddler or the Grinch is vamping around as a 1930s Weimar Republic version of a gay man, that's supposed to be the equivalent of the character being evil. And I'm supposed to sign on for that. I'm not talking about that ridiculous movie. I'm talking about the 1966 cartoon, which is narrated by Boris frickin' Karloff, for Pete's sake, and which has a great song. It has other songs, but it has one great song, You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch, which is not in the book. Boris Karloff does not narrate the book, and that song is not in there. The great bits and pieces from the 1966 cartoon, it's an absolute classic, and there's none of those bits and pieces are in the book. The book is syrupy and preachy. It is dorky in a style that foreshadowed the Green Brothers, whereas the cartoon is so much better. So a definite improvement over the original. Now we'll talk 1973. Earlier in this video, I mentioned that Max von Sydow would be making an appearance later on in the video. I bet some of you film buffs probably knew exactly where he would be making his appearance, and it's not in Needful Things. No, I'm talking about The Exorcist. In 1971, William Peter Blatty wrote a novel called The Exorcist. I think the novel is better than people tend to estimate it. It's not good, but it's better than people tend to estimate it. It would still, in case you're wondering, very much count in August for Garb August. It would very much count as trash. But it does have thought behind it. It does have thought behind it. Some of that thought is really evil. William Peter Blatty was a really nefarious figure. The more you dig into him, if you just think about him on the surface, the Wikipedia tagline, well, okay, fine. But the more you dig into his life, the more you realize that he did nothing, virtually the whole course of his life, except pal around with the very worst people, which leads me to think he was one of the very worst people. I don't know. Maybe it's not as simple as that. But a couple of years later, William Friedkin made a movie version of The Exorcist, which is it's going to be a little bit more current now because Russell Crowe is starring as the Pope's Exorcist, in a kind of Russell Crowe action hero meets the Exorcist figure. And that's on cable now. So, people are going to be thinking about the drama, the Hollywood drama, the visual spectacle of a possessed child. But when this came out in 1973, most of the people who went to see the movie had not read the book. And they simply were not ready for the image of a possessed child. That simply was not anything that audiences were ready for. And you have lots and lots of reports of audiences having visceral medical reactions to what they were seeing. But the movie is much more effective than the book. The book, when it's not on its game, I would argue there are 2 or 3 scenes where the book is on its game. When it's not on its game, it's a sweaty, hungover William Peter Blatty just pounding away at a manual typewriter. You can practically see it. And the point I'm trying to make on this whole list is that you can practically see that with most books, whether it's a manual typewriter or a word processor or a lap book. Most of the time, if you squint really hard, you can see the author just going da 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 da. And you don't do that in a movie. The movie can't have that. The movie has to strip things down to essences. So in the movie, you get a lot more. There are dead stretches in The Exorcist, very much so, and let's not even talk about the sequels. But the movie concentrates much more on those effective moments. So it's much better than its original book. And then we'll finish up this list. I see that I'm going long, so I could do this literally all day. I could give you hundreds of examples, hundreds of them. But we'll finish up with, it's a bulldozer. It's a bulldozer of a book, or rather, it's a bulldozer of a movie. And because it's a bulldozer of a movie, a lot of people overlook the fact that it definitely belongs on this list. The movie version is 100 times better than the book. That is The Wizard of Oz. As directed in 1939, mostly by Victor Fleming, but adapted from a book that came out, at the turn of the 20th century by Frank Baum. And the book is bad. The book is treacly and silly and dumb and overwritten and preachy at times, very often preachy at times, very much along the lines of the mockery that Dorothy Parker made of Winnie the Pooh, very much made along the lines of overly saccharine kids stuff. And the movie doesn't do that. The movie absolutely doesn't do that. This is not a children's movie. This is very much made for adults, and it works. It works so much better than the book does. I mean, again, hats off to Victor Fleming and to the people who were also helping him to finish this project. Hats off to that whole directing team for seeing that something as adult and effective as this movie could come from that book. I don't think that I would have seen it. I guess that's what you need to go to film school for. I don't think I would have seen it. I think I would have said, well, maybe we can make a 30-minute cartoon for children out of that book. But we can't make a movie, an actual adult movie out of it. Even, I mean, The Wizard of Oz is often silly as a movie, but knowingly so, winningly so. It's silly in a way that silly should be, in that it understands, it assumes that you can do more. As a reader or a viewer, you can do more than silly, so we're going to have fun for a while being silly. As opposed to the movies, and especially the children's books, that assume that silly is the highest you can go. So that's all we can do. You can't do any more than that. I can as an author. Of course I can. I'm the man behind the curtain. But you can't. So I'm just going to spoon feed you saccharine silliness, and that's going to be that. So that's going to finish my list for this time around. I could easily do more. I firmly believe that most literary adaptations are superior to the books they come from. So I could go on and on this way, and maybe I will in another video. But for now, I just wanted to respond. If it could have been anybody, I love the channel it came from, the page, but cat anus notwithstanding. But it could have been anybody. Really, whenever this subject comes up, I love to talk about it. Absolutely love to. I also love to quiz people about it. What adaptation of a literary work do you like more than literary work? Especially my favorite thing, which is kind of rare because readers are kind of rare. But my favorite thing is when the person in question loves the book and yet has to acknowledge that the movie is better. That doesn't happen often, but I love it when that happens. And it's even true for me on a couple of occasions. But we'll get to those. We'll get to those in later videos. I've gone on long enough with this one. So let me know what you think. I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.